Hello, friends. I hope the day is treating you kindly, and you found a quiet moment to sit with us for a while. Have you ever stood at the edge of your last chance, clutching your final dollar, while the world watches and waits for you to fail? Sometimes the things we purchase for almost nothing turn out to be worth everything. And sometimes the doors we're most afraid to open are the ones that lead us home. In the autumn of 2019, in a forgotten corner of eastern Wyoming where the wind never stops and the railroad tracks stretch to the horizon like iron stitches holding the earth together, a man named Marcus Webb stood in a crowd of strangers at a rail yard liquidation auction. He was 47 years old, but he looked older. The kind of older that comes not from time, but from weight, the invisible burden of nights that stretch too long and memories that won't fade. Marcus was tall, just over 6 feet, with the lean, corded build of someone who had forgotten to eat regularly. His dark hair, shot through with premature silver, was pulled back in a short ponytail at the base of his neck. He wore a faded olive drab field jacket over a black thermal shirt, and his jeans were worn nearly white at the knees. His work boots were scuffed and salt-stained from too many winters, but it was his eyes that told the real story. They were dark brown, almost black, and they carried the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from hypervigilance, from spending years scanning rooftops and doorways for threats that never stopped feeling real. Beside him, sitting perfectly still despite the chaos of the auction, was Sargent. The Belgian Malinois was a compact powerhouse of muscle and loyalty, his tan and black coat gleaming in the weak October sunlight. His ears were constantly swiveling, triangulating every sound, every movement in the crowd. A thin white scar ran across his right shoulder, disappearing into his fur, a souvenir from Kandahar province in 2012. Sargent had been Marcus's military working dog, his partner through 2 deployments. When Marcus left the service in 2014, he had moved heaven and earth to adopt the dog. They had been inseparable ever since, 2 damaged soldiers trying to navigate a world that no longer made sense. Marcus stood at the back of the crowd, his hand resting on Sargent's head, watching the auctioneer. The man was a local named Dale Pritchard, a heavy-set fellow in a stained cowboy hat, who spoke in a rapid-fire patter that made the desperate sound exciting. "All right, folks, next up we have Lot 47. Dale bellowed, gesturing toward a massive rusted shape sitting on a side track about 50 yards away. One authentic 1940s Great Northern Railway express car. Steel construction, original hardware, approximately 40 feet long, 12 feet high. Now, I'll be honest with you good people, she's seen better days. Roof's got some holes, floors rotted in places, and there's some fire damage on the interior. Railroad wants her gone so they can reclaim the track. She'll need to be moved off this property within 30 days, or you forfeit your purchase." Marcus squinted at the train car in the distance. Even from here, he could see the rust bleeding through the faded green paint. The windows were boarded up with weathered plywood, and graffiti covered the lower panels. It looked less like a piece of railroad history and more like a tetanus infection waiting to happen. "Now, who'll start the bidding at $500? Dale called out. The crowd was silent. A few people exchanged glances and shook their heads. "All right, how about 250? More silence. Someone in the front row laughed. $100? Folks, this is solid steel. You could convert it to storage, a hunting cabin. Hell, scrap metal alone is worth more than that." A thin man in a camouflage jacket raised his hand. "I'll give you $50 for it." The crowd chuckled. Dale looked pained. $50? "Sir, this is a historic. $50 for a rusted heap that I gotta pay to move? That's generous," the man interrupted. Dale sighed. $50, do I hear 75? Silence. Going once at 50. Marcus looked down at Sargent. The dog looked up at him, his amber eyes intelligent and calm. Marcus reached into the pocket of his field jacket and pulled out a crumpled envelope. Inside was $1.73. It was everything he had left in the world. The story of how Marcus Webb had arrived at this moment was one of slow erosion, the kind of collapse that happens so gradually you don't realize you're falling until you've already hit the ground. After leaving the Army in 2014, Marcus had struggled to find his footing. The skills that made him valuable in Kabul, vigilance, aggression, the ability to make life-or-death decisions in seconds, were liabilities in civilian life. He'd bounced from job to job. Security guard, warehouse worker, construction laborer. Each position ended the same way. An employer would notice the 1,000-yard stare, the way Marcus flinched at loud noises, the times he simply couldn't show up because the world outside his apartment felt too dangerous to navigate. 2 years ago, his wife Sarah had left. She'd taken their daughter Emma with her. Marcus didn't blame her. He had become a ghost in his own home, haunted by firefights and roadside bombs, unable to be present even when he was sitting right there at the dinner table. 6 months ago, he'd lost his apartment. He and Sargent had been living in his truck, a 1998 Ford Ranger with a rusted-out bed and a heater that only worked when it felt like it. 3 weeks ago, the truck had died on the side of Highway 85, the engine finally giving up after 240,000 miles of abuse. Marcus had sold it for scrap for $200. He'd been sleeping in a homeless shelter in Torrington, Wyoming, for the past 19 days. The shelter had a strict no-pets policy, so every night Marcus snuck Sargent in through a back window, hiding the dog under his bunk with a blanket. If they were caught, they'd both be back on the street. Winter was coming. Wyoming winter didn't forgive. Yesterday, Marcus had seen a flyer for the rail yard auction. Something about it had caught his attention. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the memory of his grandfather, who had worked for the railroad for 40 years and used to tell Marcus stories about the great trains that crossed the country, carrying everything from mail to presidents. Marcus had spent his last $20 on bus fare to get here, going twice at $50. Dale called out. Marcus's hand went up. His voice came out rough and used to speaking. $1. The crowd turned to look at him. A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Dale blinked. I'm sorry, sir. Did you say $1? $1. Marcus repeated, louder this time. That's my bid. The thin man in camouflage spun around. Are you kidding me? I bid 50. Actually, Dale said, consulting a clipboard. The railroad has the right to accept any bid if it facilitates removal of the property. But sir, he looked at Marcus with something close to pity. You understand you have to move that car off this property in 30 days? That means hiring a crane, a flatbed truck, paying for transport permits. You're looking at $10,000, maybe $15,000 minimum. Marcus met his gaze steadily. I understand. Dale studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. All right, $1. Going once, going twice. He paused, giving the camouflage man a chance to protest. The man threw up his hands. Let the fool have it. He'll be crying in a week when he realizes what he bought. Dale's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold. Lot 47 to the gentleman in the back for $1. Sir, come see me after the auction to complete the paperwork. The crowd dispersed, shaking their heads. Marcus heard the whispers as people walked past him. That veteran's got some screws loose. Did you see that dog? Probably dangerous. $1 for a 40-foot train car he can't move. Genius. Marcus ignored them. He looked down at Sargent. What do you think, buddy? Did we just buy a home? Sargent's tail wagged once. Thump against the dirt. An hour later, Marcus stood alone in the rail yard, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the gravel. The auction crowd had long since dispersed, taking their pickups and trailers full of salvaged equipment. The yard was silent except for the wind whistling through the gaps in the old buildings and the distant clang of metal on metal from the active rail line a half-mile away. Marcus held the bill of sale in his hand. The paper felt impossibly light for something that represented his entire future. One 1940s Great Northern Railway Express car. Sold as is. Final sale, $1. Come on, Sergeant, Marcus said quietly. Let's go see what we bought. They walked across the yard, boots crunching on the gravel and cinders. As they got closer, the true condition of the train car became apparent, and Marcus felt his stomach sink. The car sat on a rusted siding track that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Weeds grew up through the railroad ties, and the rails themselves were orange with corrosion. The car itself was massive, just as Dale had described, roughly 40 feet long and 12 feet high. But calling it distressed would have been charitable. The steel sides were covered in layers of graffiti, tags, and crude drawings layered on top of each other like archaeological strata. The original forest green paint of the Great Northern Railway was barely visible beneath the spray paint. The roof showed clear evidence of fire damage, with blackened metal and several gaping holes where the steel had burned through or rusted away completely. The windows that hadn't been boarded up were shattered, and the door on the side of the car hung at an angle, the top hinge completely broken. A faded yellow sign near the door read, "Authorized personnel only, U.S. mail." Marcus walked slowly around the perimeter. Sergeant trotted ahead, his nose working, cataloging every scent. When the dog reached the far end of the car, he stopped abruptly. His ears flattened against his skull, and a low, vibrating growl started in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Marcus called out, moving to join him. Sergeant was staring at the rear door of the car, a heavy sliding steel door that was sealed shut with a massive padlock. But it wasn't the lock that had caught the dog's attention. Someone had spray-painted a message across the door in jagged red letters. "Stay out. Cursed. Free died here." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October wind. He reached down and rested his hand on Sergeant's head. The dog's muscles were tense, coiled. "Easy," Marcus murmured. "It's just paint. Just some kids trying to scare people." But Sergeant wasn't convinced. The Malinois kept his eyes locked on that door, a soft whine escaping his throat. Marcus looked up at the train car. In the fading afternoon light, it looked less like a home and more like a coffin on wheels. He thought about the thin man's words at the auction. He'll be crying in a week when he realizes what he bought. Maybe the man was right. Maybe this was the final, definitive proof that Marcus Webb had completely lost his mind. He had just spent his last dollar on 40 feet of rusted steel that he had no way to move, no way to repair, and apparently, according to local urban legends, was cursed. Marcus pulled out his phone. The screen showed 3% battery remaining and in service. He'd let his cell plan lapse 2 months ago. The phone was essentially a flashlight and a camera now, nothing more. He took a photo of the train car, then looked at it on the screen. In the image, the car looked even more decrepit, a monument to decay and poor decisions. "What the hell did I just do?" Marcus whispered to himself. Sergeant looked up at him and whined again, softer this time. It wasn't fear. It was concern. The dog was worried about his human. Marcus knelt down, ignoring the protest from his knees, and looked Sergeant in the eyes. "I know, buddy. I know this looks bad, but it's shelter. It's got 4 walls and most of a roof. Winter's coming, and I can't keep sneaking you into that shelter. This is all we've got." The dog licked Marcus's face, his rough tongue scraping across the stubble on the veteran's chin. Marcus stood up and approached the side door, the one hanging from a single hinge. He grabbed the edge and pulled. The metal shrieked in protest, but the door moved, swinging outward and nearly falling off completely. The interior was dark, lit only by the dying sunlight filtering through the holes in the roof and the gaps in the boarded windows. Marcus clicked on his phone's flashlight, the weak LED beam cutting through the gloom. The inside of the car was a disaster. The floor was indeed rotted, with sections of the wooden decking completely gone, exposing the steel frame beneath. The walls were covered in more graffiti, and in the corners, he could see evidence of previous occupants: crushed beer cans, needles, a moldy sleeping bag. But it was the far end of the car that made Marcus pause. There was a wall. Not the exterior wall of the car, but an interior partition, a heavy steel bulkhead that divided the car roughly in half. In the center of the bulkhead was a door, a watertight ship-style door with a circular locking wheel, the kind you'd see on a submarine or a bank vault. The door was sealed shut, and unlike the graffiti-covered exterior, this interior bulkhead was clean, almost pristine. Someone had taken care to preserve it, to keep it sealed. Marcus approached slowly, his boots echoing on the remaining floor planks. He reached out and touched the locking wheel. It was cold, solid steel, and it didn't budge when he tested it. Sergeant had followed him inside, but the dog stopped about 10 feet from the bulkhead door. He sat down firmly, refusing to go closer. His eyes were locked on that sealed door, and the growl returned, deeper this time, more insistent. Marcus looked at the dog, then back at the door. A rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive in Afghanistan, was screaming at him that something was wrong. Dogs knew things. They sensed things that humans couldn't. But another part of him, the part that had just spent his last dollar on this train car, needed to know what was behind that door. Was it just an empty cargo hold? Or was there something else, something that explained why this car had sold for $1? Why it carried warnings about curses and death? Marcus grabbed the locking wheel with both hands and pulled. It didn't move. He tried turning it clockwise, then counterclockwise. Nothing. The mechanism was either rusted solid or locked from the other side. "All right," Marcus said, stepping back. We'll deal with that later. First things first, we need to make this place livable. He turned to survey the front section of the car, the part they could actually access. It was approximately 20 feet long, which was more space than his truck bed. The ceiling was about 7 feet high, plenty of headroom. If he could patch the holes in the roof, seal up the broken windows, and shore up the floor, this could actually work. It had to work. He was out of options. By the time the sun set, Marcus had made minimal progress. He'd used a broken piece of plywood he found in the rail yard to prop up the broken door, giving them at least some security. He'd swept out the worst of the debris with a rusted shovel someone had abandoned near the tracks. He'd even found a few cardboard boxes and flattened them across the rotted sections of floor to create safe pathways. It wasn't much, but it was something. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Marcus could see his breath puffing in the weak beam of his dying phone flashlight. He'd turned it off to save battery, and now the only light came from the distant security lights of the active rail yard, faint yellow squares filtering through the cracks in the boards. Marcus sat on his sleeping bag in the corner farthest from the sealed bulkhead door. It was a military surplus bag, olive drab and worn thin from years of use, but it was rated to 20 degrees. Sergeant curled up against Marcus's side, the dog's body heat radiating through the fabric of his jacket. Marcus had nothing to eat. He hadn't eaten since the day before, a gas station hot dog purchased with the last of his spare change. His stomach growled, but he'd learned to ignore hunger. It was just another discomfort, another sensation to compartmentalize. But Sergeant hadn't eaten either, and that bothered Marcus more than his own hunger. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small bag of dog kibble, maybe 2 cups worth. It was the last of it. Here, buddy, Marcus whispered, pouring the kibble onto the flattened cardboard. Eat up. Sergeant sniffed the food but didn't eat. Instead, the dog looked up at Marcus, then back at the food, then back at Marcus again. Don't do that, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. Don't try to share with me. You need to eat. I'll be fine. Sergeant whined softly, still not touching the food. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. This dog, this beautiful, loyal animal, had saved his life more times than he could count. In Afghanistan, Sergeant had detected IEDs that would have killed Marcus's entire squad. He'd alerted to ambushes, warned of approaching threats, and once, in a firefight outside of Kandahar, had tackled an insurgent who was raising a pistol to Marcus's back. And here, in this rusted train car in the middle of nowhere, the dog was still trying to take care of him. Eat, Sergeant, Marcus commanded, his voice firm. That's an order. The dog's ears perked up at the command voice. After a moment's hesitation, Sergeant lowered his head and began to eat, crunching the kibble methodically. Marcus leaned his head back against the cold steel wall and closed his eyes. The reality of his situation crashed over him like a wave. He was homeless. He was broke. He was squatting in a rusted train car that he technically owned but couldn't move. He had no food, no water, no prospects, and winter was maybe 3 weeks away. What am I doing? Marcus whispered to the darkness. What the hell am I doing? A memory surfaced, unbidden but sharp as broken glass. It was 2012. Marcus was in a forward operating base in Helmand Province. He'd just returned from a patrol where an IED had killed one of his closest friends, a kid from Iowa named Tyler, who collected comic books and could do a perfect Bugs Bunny impression. Marcus had been sitting alone in the dark, his service weapon in his hands, staring at it, thinking about how easy it would be to make everything stop. Then Sergeant had appeared. The dog had nosed open the door to Marcus's hooch and patted over. Without any command, without any invitation, Sergeant had simply laid down across Marcus's boots, pinning them to the floor, his weight a physical reminder that Marcus was not alone. The dog had stayed there all night. Every time Marcus's hand moved toward the weapon, Sergeant's head would lift, amber eyes catching the moonlight, watching, waiting, refusing to let his handler make that choice. Marcus had made it through that night, and the next, and the hundreds after. Now, in the cold darkness of the train car, Marcus felt Sergeant shift position. The dog moved from his side to lie across Marcus's feet, just like he had done all those years ago in Afghanistan. Still got my back, don't you, buddy? Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Sergeant's tail thumped once against the floor. Marcus pulled his sleeping bag tighter around himself. The cold was already seeping through the thin fabric, and he knew it would be a long, miserable night. But he'd survived worse. They both had. Through a gap in the boarded window, Marcus could see a handful of stars, bright pinpoints in the vast Wyoming sky. He focused on them, using an old meditation technique his VA therapist had taught him. Count the stars. Breathe slowly. Stay in the present moment. But it was hard to stay present when the past kept bleeding through. Another memory, Emma's 5th birthday. Marcus had been home on leave. They'd gone to Chuck E. Cheese, and Emma had won a little stuffed dog from the skill crane. She'd named it Sergeant Jr. and insisted it sleep with her every night. 2 years later, when Sarah told Marcus she was leaving, Emma had been 8. She'd clung to his leg, crying, begging him not to let them go. But Marcus had been paralyzed, unable to find the words, unable to promise he'd get better because he didn't know if that was true. Sarah had taken Emma's hand and pulled her gently away. The last thing Marcus saw was his daughter's face, streaked with tears, looking back at him from the car window. That was 14 months ago. He hadn't seen her since. He'd tried to call, but his number was blocked. He'd tried to visit, but Sarah had moved and not left a forwarding address. His lawyer had told him that without stable housing and employment, he had no chance of getting visitation rights. Stable housing. That's what he needed. That's why this train car mattered. It was a long shot, maybe an impossible shot, but it was something. If he could make this work, if he could turn this rusted hulk into a legitimate residence, maybe he could start the process of getting his life back. Maybe he could see Emma again. A sound snapped Marcus out of his thoughts. It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but distinct. A metallic scraping sound, like steel sliding against steel. It was coming from the sealed bulkhead door. Marcus sat up, his hand automatically reaching for the knife clipped to his belt. Sergeant was already on his feet, facing the door, every muscle tense. The sound came again. Scrape, like something heavy being dragged across metal. Then silence. Marcus waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. 5 minutes passed. 10. The sound didn't repeat. Just the metal contracting in the cold, Marcus told himself. Thermal expansion. Nothing more. But Sergeant didn't relax. The dog stood guard, staring at that door, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Marcus didn't sleep much that first night. Every time he started to drift off, some new sound would jerk him awake. The wind rattling the loose panels. A distant train horn. The skittering of what might have been rats in the walls. And always, in the back of his mind, the question, what's behind that door? Marcus woke to cold sunlight streaming through the gaps in the boarded windows. His entire body ached from sleeping on the hard floor, and his breath plumed in the frigid morning air. The temperature inside the train car couldn't have been more than 35 degrees. Sergeant was already awake, sitting by the broken door, watching the rail yard. When Marcus stirred, the dog looked back and gave a soft woof of greeting. "Morning, buddy," Marcus croaked. His throat was raw from the cold. He crawled out of his sleeping bag and immediately regretted it. The cold air hit him like a physical blow. He pulled on his field jacket and stood up, his joints popping and cracking in protest. Through the gap in the doorway, Marcus could see movement in the rail yard. A group of men were standing near the fence, maybe 200 yards away, pointing at his train car and laughing. He recognized one of them, the thin man in camouflage from the auction yesterday. Marcus pushed the door open wider and stepped out onto the small steel platform at the side of the car. The men saw him immediately. "Hey, look, the train hobo's awake," one of them called out, and the group erupted in laughter. Marcus ignored them. He climbed down the ladder-style steps to the ground, Sergeant following close behind. His first priority was water. There had to be a spigot somewhere in this rail yard. He started walking toward the old station building, searching for an outdoor faucet. As he walked, he heard footsteps crunching on gravel behind him. He turned to find 3 of the men from the fence following him. The thin man in camouflage was in the lead, flanked by 2 others, a heavy-set guy with a beard and a younger man in a trucker cap. "Excuse me, friend," the thin man called out with exaggerated politeness. "We just wanted to check on you. Make sure you survived your first night in your castle." Marcus stopped walking. Sergeant positioned himself between Marcus and the approaching men, his posture neutral but alert. "I'm fine," Marcus said flatly. "Thanks for your concern." The bearded man snorted. "Concern? Buddy, we're placing bets on how long before you either freeze to death or that whole car collapses on your head. I give you 2 weeks. Dave here, he jerked a thumb at the thin man. He thinks you'll last less than a week. I'm optimistic, Dave said with a smirk. I think our friend here might make it a whole 10 days before he admits he made the dumbest purchase in Wyoming history. The younger man in the trucker cap circled around to get a better look at Sergeant. That's a Belgian Malinois, right? Military dog. Marcus tensed. Yeah, and he doesn't like strangers. Relax, brother, the young man said. I was Army too. 3rd Infantry. Did a tour in Iraq back in '08. Marcus nodded slightly. 173rd Airborne. Afghanistan. 2 tours. The young man's expression shifted, becoming slightly more respectful. Airborne, huh? Well, with all due respect, man, what the hell are you doing living in that death trap? There are resources, you know. VA programs, veteran housing assistance. I'm aware, Marcus cut him off. He'd heard this speech before from well-meaning strangers who had no idea how broken the system actually was. I'm handling it. Dave laughed again. Handling it? You bought a train car for $1 that you can't move, can't repair, and can't live in safely. There's a reason nobody else bid on that thing. And what reason is that? Marcus asked, keeping his voice level. The 3 men exchanged glances. The bearded one spoke up. You really don't know the story? About that car? Why don't you tell me? Dave stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a ghost story around a campfire. That car's been sitting on that siding for damn near 30 years. Used to be a Great Northern Express car, moved mail and high-value cargo back in the 40s and 50s. But something happened to it in the winter of 1952. They were transporting something classified, something the government didn't want people to know about. The bearded man picked up the story. There was an accident, a derailment about 50 miles west of here. Only car that survived was that one, the express car. But when the recovery crews got there, they found 3 railroad men dead inside. The official report said carbon monoxide poisoning, but the locals who saw the bodies said different. Said the men looked terrified, like they'd seen something horrible before they died. The railroad company sealed up the back section, the young man continued, where the cargo was. Nobody ever opened it. They just parked the car on this siding and forgot about it. Over the years, it became a local legend. Kids would dare each other to touch the door. Homeless folks would try to shelter in the front section, but nobody ever stayed more than one night. Dave grinned. They say anyone who tries to open that sealed door ends up dead within 30 days. 3 different people over the years have tried. All 3 died. 1 in a car accident. 1 from a heart attack. 1 just disappeared. Never found the body. Marcus stared at them. You're telling me ghost stories. Hey, believe what you want, Dave shrugged. But I've lived in this county my whole life. And I'm telling you, that train car is bad news. The railroad company has been trying to get rid of it for years. That's why they accepted your $1. They just want it gone. Don't care who takes it or what happens to it. Thanks for the warning, Marcus said, turning away. I'll take my chances. Your funeral, brother, the bearded man called after him. Literally. Marcus found a working spigot on the side of the old station building. He filled up 2 plastic bottles he'd found in the trash, testing the water first to make sure it was clean. Sergeant drank from Marcus's cupped hands, lapping up the cold water gratefully. As they walked back toward the train car, Marcus thought about what the men had said. Cursed train car. 3 deaths. Sealed cargo hold. It was nonsense, obviously. There were no such things as curses. But the fact remained that the train car had sat abandoned for decades, and the railroad company had been desperate enough to accept a $1 bid just to get rid of it. What's behind that door? The question echoed in his mind again. When they reached the train car, Sergeant climbed the steps first, as always, checking for threats. But at the top of the steps, the dog stopped. His hackles rose, and that low, warning growl started in his chest. Marcus climbed up behind him. What is it, boy? Then he saw it. The sealed bulkhead door, the one with the circular locking wheel, was open. Not fully open, but cracked, as if someone, or something, had turned the wheel from the inside and pushed the door outward about 2 inches. A thin line of absolute darkness showed in the gap. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. That door had been locked solid last night. He'd tested it himself. There was no way it could have opened on its own, unless someone was inside. Sergeant barked once, sharp and aggressive, warning whatever was in there to show itself. The train car was silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the holes in the roof. Marcus's hand went to the knife on his belt. He stepped forward slowly, his boots echoing on the metal floor. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to leave, to never look back. But this was his home now, his last chance. And if there was someone in there, some squatter or intruder, he needed to know. He reached out with one hand and grabbed the edge of the heavy steel door. "Last chance," he called out. "Show yourself, or I'm coming in." Silence. Marcus pulled the door open. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the morning light. And from that darkness came a smell, faint but distinct. Old paper, metal, and something else. Something that smelled like fear preserved for 70 years. Sargent refused to cross the threshold. The dog planted his feet, pulled back on his invisible leash of instinct. Every fiber of his being screaming that this was wrong. This was danger. This was death. Marcus stood at the edge of that darkness, staring into the sealed cargo hold that 3 men had died in, the hold that had been locked away for nearly 30 years. And somewhere in that darkness, he heard it. A sound like breathing. Slow, rhythmic, patient. Waiting. Marcus stood frozen at the threshold of the sealed cargo hold, his hand still gripping the edge of the heavy steel door. The breathing sound, if that's what it actually was, had stopped the moment he opened the door wider. Now there was only silence, deep and suffocating, pouring out of that darkness like cold water. Sargent remained at Marcus's heel, but the dog's entire body vibrated with tension. Every few seconds, he would let out a sharp huff of breath, a canine warning that something was profoundly wrong with this situation. Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket. The battery showed 2%. He activated the flashlight, and the weak LED beam cut into the darkness like a knife through smoke. The cargo hold was approximately 20 feet deep, matching the section of the car they'd been sleeping in. But unlike the front section with its rotted floor and graffiti-covered walls, this space had been perfectly preserved. The floor was solid steel, clean of rust. The walls were lined with built-in storage racks, empty now, but showing clear marks where cargo containers had once been secured. But it was the far wall that made Marcus's breath catch. Someone had covered it with photographs. Dozens of them, maybe 100, taped and pinned in neat rows. Black and white photographs, yellowed with age, showing men in 1940s-era railroad uniforms. Men standing beside trains. Men loading cargo. Men smiling at the camera, young and alive. And in the center of that wall, written in white paint in large, careful letters. They promised we'd be safe. They lied. Marcus took a step into the cargo hold. His boot echoed on the steel floor. Sargent whined behind him, but didn't follow. "Stay," Marcus commanded softly. "Guard." He moved slowly through the space, his flashlight beams sweeping across the photographs. As he got closer, he could make out details. The men were all wearing Great Northern Railway uniforms. In several photos, they were loading wooden crates marked with stenciled letters. U.S. Government. Classified. Handle with care. Marcus reached the far wall and examined the photographs more closely. In one image, 3 men stood together, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. Someone had written names below their faces in faded pencil. Jack Reeves, Tom Bradley, Henry Chun. Below that photograph was a newspaper clipping, protected in a plastic sleeve. The headline read, "3 railroad men die in mysterious accident. Carbon monoxide suspected." Marcus pulled the clipping closer to read the article, but his phone's flashlight flickered. The battery was dying. "Damn it," he muttered. He needed to preserve what little power remained. He quickly snapped photos of the wall, of the photographs, of the newspaper clipping, and of the painted message. The camera's flash strobed through the cargo hold, creating stark shadows that made the space feel even more claustrophobic. As he worked, his light caught something else. On the floor in the far corner, partially hidden behind one of the empty cargo racks, was a large olive-drab military footlocker. Marcus's phone died completely, plunging him into absolute darkness. "Shit," he said into the black. He stood still, letting his eyes adjust. Faint light leaked in from the front section of the car, just enough to prevent complete blindness. He felt his way along the wall until he reached the footlocker. It was heavy, metal, with U.S. Army stenciled on the side. A combination lock secured the latch. Marcus tried to lift it. The locker was too heavy to carry easily, especially in the dark. He'd have to come back for it later, with light and tools. He made his way back to the front section of the car, pulling the heavy steel door closed behind him. The circular locking wheel turned smoothly now, as if it had never been stuck. He spun it tight, hearing the bolts slide home. Sargent immediately relaxed, his tail wagging slightly. The dog pressed his nose into Marcus's hand, seeking reassurance. "I know, buddy," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "I don't like it either." He looked around the front section of the car, his mind racing. The photographs, the message, the newspaper clipping, the footlocker. This wasn't just an abandoned train car. This was a memorial. Someone had turned that cargo hold into a shrine, preserving the memory of 3 men who died in 1952. But who? And why seal it up? And how the hell had that door opened during the night? Marcus shook his head. First things first. He couldn't investigate mysteries if he froze to death or starved. He needed to focus on immediate survival: shelter, food, water, and most importantly, a way to charge his phone so he could see what he'd photographed. He inventoried what he had: 1 sleeping bag, 1 nearly empty backpack, a folding knife, 3 feet of paracord, 2 plastic water bottles, now full, a dead phone, the clothes on his back, and a trained military working dog. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Marcus spent the morning doing what he could to improve their living situation. He used broken pallets from around the rail yard to patch the largest holes in the floor. He found sheets of corrugated tin and managed to prop them over the worst of the roof damage, weighing them down with rocks. It wasn't weatherproof, but it would keep out some of the rain and snow. Around noon, Sargent's ears perked up. The dog stood and moved to the door, his tail wagging, a sign of interest rather than threat. Marcus heard the sound a moment later, an engine approaching, something heavy and diesel. He moved to the door and looked out. A tow truck was rumbling across the rail yard, kicking up dust as it navigated around abandoned equipment. The truck was old but well-maintained, painted a faded blue with Talbot's Towing and Recovery stenciled on the door. The truck pulled up near the train car, and the engine shut off. The driver's door opened, and a woman climbed out. She was in her mid-50s, Marcus guessed, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore grease-stained Carhartt coveralls over a flannel shirt, and her work boots had seen better days. But it was her face that caught Marcus's attention, weathered and lined, but open and kind, with sharp blue eyes that assessed him quickly but without judgment. "You the fellow who bought this old girl for $1?" she called out, gesturing at the train car. Marcus climbed down from the car, Sargent at his side. "That's me, Marcus Webb. Catherine Talbot," she said, extending a calloused hand. "Most folks call me Cat. I own the towing company in town." Marcus shook her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "Let me guess," Marcus said. "Dale Pritchard sent you out here to see if I needed a crane to move this thing." Cat laughed, a warm sound. "Actually, no. Dale's an opportunist, but I don't work for him. I came out here on my own. Heard about the auction, heard someone actually bought this old express car, and I got curious. Plus," she looked at Sargent, "I heard you had a dog, and I wanted to make sure you both were all right." She crouched down, extending her hand to Sargent. "May I?" "Sargent, friend," Marcus said. The dog approached Cat and sniffed her hand thoroughly before allowing her to scratch behind his ears. Cat smiled. "Beautiful Mal military?" "Yeah. We served together. 2 tours." Cat stood up, her expression softening. "My son was Army. Did 3 tours in Iraq. He didn't come home." "I'm sorry," Marcus said quietly. Cat nodded, accepting the condolence. Then she looked up at the train car, her expression shifting to professional assessment. "So what's your plan here? Because I'm going to be honest with you, Marcus, moving this car is going to cost you at least $12,000, probably more. You need a heavy-duty crane, a flatbed trailer, permits, escort vehicles. It's not a simple job." "I know," Marcus admitted. "I don't have that kind of money. Hell, I don't have any money. I spent my last dollar buying this thing." Cat studied him for a long moment. "So what? You're just going to live here? In a train car on a rail yard siding, with winter coming? That's the plan." "That's not a plan, son. That's a suicide attempt with extra steps." Marcus bristled. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't need a lecture." "I'm not lecturing," Cat interrupted. "I'm offering to help. See, I've lived in this county for 38 years. I know this rail yard, and I know the people who run it. And I know something you don't. The railroad company isn't going to come and force that 30-day deadline. They just want that car off their books. As long as you're not causing problems, they'll leave you alone. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Really? Really? They've been trying to get rid of this car for years. Hell, they're probably relieved someone finally took it. She paused. But that doesn't solve your immediate problems. You've got no power, no heat, no running water. You'll last maybe 2 weeks out here before hypothermia or dehydration gets you. I've survived worse, Marcus said, but even to his own ears, it sounded hollow. Kat crossed her arms. I'm sure you have, but you don't have to survive this alone. Look, I'm not saying I can solve all your problems, but I can help with a few things. I've got a small diesel generator I can loan you. It's old and loud, but it'll give you enough power to run a space heater and charge your electronics. And I know where you can get food and water without spending money you don't have. Why would you help me? Marcus asked, suspicious despite himself. You don't know me. Kat looked at Sargent, then back at Marcus. My son came back from his second tour different. Angry. Couldn't sleep. Jumped at loud noises. I tried to get him help, tried to get him into the VA system, but it was slow and broken and he fell through the cracks. By the time his third deployment came up, I begged him not to go. But he said he was more comfortable over there than he was here. He died 3 months later. She met Marcus's eyes. I couldn't save my son, but maybe I can help someone else's son. That reason enough for you? Marcus felt something crack in his chest, a small fissure in the wall he'd built around himself. Yes, ma'am. That's reason enough. Kat nodded briskly, all business again. Good. I'll be back this evening with the generator and some supplies. In the meantime, there's something you should know about this train car. Let me guess. It's cursed, and I'm going to die? Kat smiled slightly. So you've heard the stories. Look, I don't believe in curses. But I do believe in history, and this car has a hell of a history. The accident in 1952 wasn't just some random derailment. That train was carrying something important, something classified. The government cleaned it up fast, sealed the cargo hold, and made the whole thing disappear from the records. How do you know all this? Marcus asked. Because one of the men who died in that accident was my uncle, Tom Bradley. He was my mother's older brother. Marcus felt his breath catch. Tom Bradley. That was one of the names written under the photographs in the cargo hold. I'm sorry, Marcus said. Kat waved it off. It was a long time ago. I never knew him. I was born 10 years after he died. But my mother talked about him sometimes. Said he was a good man, always looking out for his crew. She never believed the official story about carbon monoxide poisoning. Said Tom was too careful for that. What did she think happened? Kat hesitated. She thought the government killed them to cover up what they were transporting. I always figured that was just grief talking, you know? But she looked at the train car, her expression troubled. There were always rumors. Stories about that sealed cargo hold. About what might be in there. Marcus thought about the photographs, the message on the wall, the footlocker. I opened it, he said quietly. The cargo hold. The door was unsealed when I woke up this morning. Kat's eyes widened. You went inside? Yeah. It's empty now, no cargo. But someone turned it into a memorial. There are photographs of the men who died, newspaper clippings, a message painted on the wall. What kind of message? They promised we'd be safe. They lied. Kat was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother said the same thing. The railroad company promised those men they'd be safe, that the cargo wasn't dangerous. But something went wrong. There's a footlocker in there too, Marcus added. Military footlocker, locked. I couldn't see what's inside. Kat looked at him intently. Will you let me see it? The cargo hold, the photographs, all of it. Of course. It's your uncle. Kat nodded slowly. Then I'll be back this evening. We'll go through it together. Maybe we can finally figure out what really happened to Tom and his crew. She climbed back into her tow truck, but before starting the engine, she leaned out the window. Marcus, you did a good thing, buying this car. Maybe you don't know it yet, but you did. Those men deserved better than being forgotten on a siding for 70 years. With that, she started the engine and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the dust with Sargent by his side. Well, buddy, Marcus said to the dog. Looks like we just found an ally. Sargent's tail wagged. For the first time since the auction, Marcus felt like maybe, just maybe, things might actually work out. Catherine Talbot returned as promised, just as the sun was setting. Her tow truck was loaded with supplies. The diesel generator she'd mentioned, a small electric space heater, a 5-gallon jug of water, a bag of dog food, and a cardboard box full of canned goods and other supplies. Marcus helped her unload, his gratitude making it hard to speak. "This is too much," he finally managed. "It's what we've got," Kat said simply. "Now, let's get that generator set up before it gets full dark." They worked together as the twilight deepened. Kat showed Marcus how to run the generator safely, positioning it outside the train car to prevent carbon monoxide buildup. She helped him string an extension cord through a gap in the door, powering the space heater and a work light she'd brought. Within an hour, the front section of the train car was transformed. The space heater glowed orange, pushing back the cold. The work light hung from a hook on the ceiling, casting warm yellow light into the corners. The temperature rose from freezing to something approaching comfortable. Marcus plugged in his phone to charge, watching the battery icon flicker to life with almost tearful relief. Kat prepared a simple meal on a camping stove she'd brought. Canned beef stew heated in a pot, with crackers on the side. She poured generous portions into paper bowls and handed one to Marcus. "Eat," she commanded. "You look like you haven't had a decent meal in weeks." Marcus didn't argue. He ate ravenously, the hot food settling into his empty stomach like a blessing. Beside him, Sergeant Crunch threw a bowl of kibble, his tail wagging with contentment. After they'd eaten, Kat looked at the sealed cargo hold door. "Ready?" Marcus nodded. His phone was charged enough to use as a flashlight again. He spun the locking wheel and pulled the heavy door open. Kat stepped into the cargo hold, Marcus following with the light. When the beam illuminated the wall of photographs, Kat let out a soft gasp. "That's him," she whispered, moving toward the center photo. "That's Tom." She touched the photograph gently, tracing the outline of her uncle's face. He looked so young. God, he was only 28 when he died. Marcus gave her space, letting her process. After a moment, she noticed the newspaper clipping below the photo and read it carefully. "Carbon monoxide poisoning," she read aloud, her voice bitter. "That's what they told my grandmother. That it was an accident, a faulty heater in the car. But look at this message." She gestured to the painted words. "They promised we'd be safe. They lied. That's not the message of someone who died in an accident." "No," Marcus agreed. "It's the message of someone who knew something. Someone who wanted the truth preserved." "But who wrote it?" Kat asked. "Who created this memorial?" Marcus moved his light to the footlocker in the corner. "Maybe the answer's in here. You said you know combinations?" Kat knelt beside the locker. "I worked on military base housing for years. Combination locks all follow similar patterns." She examined the lock, then tried several standard military combinations. 000, 123, 505. None worked. "Wait," she said suddenly. "When did Tom die? What was the date?" Marcus pulled out his phone, now charged enough to view the photos he'd taken earlier. He zoomed in on the newspaper clipping. December 12, 1952. Kat tried December 12, 52. The lock clicked open. They looked at each other, then Kat lifted the lid. Inside the footlocker was a treasure trove of documents and artifacts, carefully preserved in plastic bags. There were more photographs, personal letters, official railroad documents, and at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal. Kat lifted out the journal with shaking hands. The cover was embossed with a name, Jack Reeves. "That's one of the other men who died," Marcus said, remembering the names from the photographs. Kat opened the journal. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, dated entries spanning several months in 1952. She read aloud from the first entry. October 15, 1952. "Tom, Henry, and I have been assigned to a special detail. Government cargo, classified. They won't tell us what we're transporting, but the pay is triple our normal rate. Tom's wife is expecting their second child, and I could use the money for the farm. Henry says we'd be fools to turn it down. So we're in." Kat flipped forward several pages. November 3, 1952. "We picked up the cargo today at a government facility outside Denver. 17 wooden crates, each marked classified. We weren't allowed to see what was inside, but the crates are heavy and they're warm to the touch. The government men made us sign papers saying we'd never speak about this shipment to anyone. Ever." Tom joked that we're probably transporting captured alien technology. Henry didn't laugh. Marcus and Kat exchanged glances. "Warm to the touch." Marcus said, "What kind of cargo generates heat?" Kat continued reading. November 28, 1952. "Strange things happening on this run. The cargo is definitely warm. You can feel it through the wooden crates." Henry checked with his Geiger counter. He served in the Pacific and keeps one after Hiroshima. He says there's radiation. Not deadly levels, but it's there. We're transporting radioactive material, and nobody told us. When Tom confronted the government escort, they threatened to have us all arrested if we said anything. We're supposed to deliver this cargo to a facility in Washington state by December 15th. Jesus, Kat whispered. They were transporting radioactive materials without proper protection? Marcus felt cold despite the space heater in the next room. Keep reading. December 11th, 1952. We're all sick. Nausea, headaches, nosebleeds. Henry says the radiation levels in the cargo hold are increasing. Something's wrong with the cargo. It's getting hotter. Tom wants to stop the train and call for help, but the government escort says if we delay the shipment, we'll all be court-martialed under the Espionage Act. We have to keep moving. December 12th, 1952, early morning. The train derailed around 2 a.m. We don't know why. The tracks were clear, weather was fine. It felt like something pushed us off the rails. The engine and the other cars went into the ravine. Our car, the express car, somehow stayed upright. But the government escort is dead. The engineer is dead. We're alone with the cargo, and it's on fire. Not normal fire, green fire, hot enough to melt metal. We tried to escape, but the doors won't open. They sealed us in. Henry's coughing blood. Tom keeps saying they promised we'd be safe. I'm writing this because someone needs to know the truth. They lied. The government lied. We're going to die because they lied. The entry ended there. Kat turned the page, but the rest of the journal was blank. She closed the book, tears streaming down her face. They knew, she said, her voice breaking. The government knew the cargo was dangerous, and they sent those men to transport it anyway. And when the accident happened, they covered it up. They sealed this car and left it to rot so no one would ever know. Marcus felt a surge of familiar rage, the same anger he'd felt in Afghanistan when he watched politicians send soldiers into danger for lies wrapped in flags. What were they transporting, he asked. What kind of radioactive material? Kat dug through the footlocker and pulled out a sheet of official-looking paper, brittle with age. It was a government shipping manifest, stamped classified and declassified 1992. She read it, her eyes widening. Oh my God, they were transporting refined uranium oxide, yellowcake, for the nuclear weapons program. This was right in the middle of the Cold War, the arms race. They were moving nuclear materials by railroad, using civilian crews, with almost no safety precautions. And when it went wrong, Marcus said, they couldn't admit it, couldn't risk the public panic, couldn't risk the scandal. So they buried it. They buried 3 men and the truth with them. Kat looked around the cargo hold, at the photographs of smiling young men who didn't know they'd been sent to die. Someone created this memorial, she said. Someone who knew the truth and wanted it preserved. But who? Marcus thought about the door that had opened during the night, the breathing sound he'd heard, the feeling of being watched. I don't know, but whoever it was, they wanted this story told. And maybe, he looked at Kat, that's why you're here. Maybe that's why I bought this car for $1. So the truth could finally come out. Kat wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. Then that's what we'll do. We'll tell their story. But first, she looked at Marcus. We need to make sure you can actually stay here and survive the winter. Because you can't honor their memory if you freeze to death. Marcus nodded. Agreed. What do you suggest? Kat thought for a moment. I know some people in town. Folks who help veterans. We can get you food, water, basic supplies. And I can teach you how to properly weatherproof this car, how to make it livable. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Living here is going to be hard. Really hard. Are you sure you want to do this? Marcus thought about his daughter Emma. He thought about the 3 railroad men who had been forgotten for 70 years. He thought about Sargent, loyal and patient beside him. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. This place, it feels like it's been waiting for someone. Someone who gives a damn. I may be homeless and broke, but I can give a damn. I can make sure those men are remembered. Kat smiled, a fierce, proud expression. Then we'd better get to work. Winter's coming fast. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus's life transformed from desperate survival to something approaching stability. True to her word, Catherine Talbot became his lifeline to the world beyond the rail yard. She connected him with a local veteran support group that donated food, blankets, and warm clothing. She brought salvaged materials from her junkyard, sheets of plywood, rolls of insulation, buckets of weatherproofing compound, and taught Marcus how to properly seal the train car against the coming winter. Marcus worked from dawn until dusk, attacking the project with the same focused intensity he'd once applied to mission planning in Afghanistan. He patched every hole in the roof, layering tar paper and metal sheeting. He insulated the walls with fiberglass batting stuffed between the steel ribs and covered with plywood panels. He replaced sections of the rotted floor with salvaged lumber, creating a solid, level surface. Sargent supervised every step, lying in patches of sunlight that streamed through the windows, occasionally rising to investigate interesting smells or to warn Marcus when strangers approached the rail yard. During this time, Marcus also dove deeper into the mystery of the three railroad men. Cat had taken the journal and documents to a local historian, who confirmed that the train derailment of December 12, 1952, had indeed been covered up by the federal government. The historian found references to it in recently declassified documents, including a memo from the Atomic Energy Commission acknowledging an incident involving nuclear materials in Wyoming, but providing no details. The historian also discovered something else. A fourth man had been on that train, a government inspector named Robert Kellerman, assigned to escort the uranium shipment. He had survived the derailment and lived until 1988. But in his final years, according to his obituary, he'd become a reclusive figure plagued by guilt over events in his past. I think Kellerman created the memorial, Kat told Marcus one evening as they ate dinner in the now comfortable train car. He's the only one who survived. He probably spent the rest of his life trying to honor those men. But how did he get access to the train car? Marcus asked. It was sealed up by the railroad. Maybe he had connections, government credentials, or maybe... Kat looked toward the cargo hold door. Maybe he never really left. Maybe he came back here, year after year, adding to the memorial, preserving their memory. Marcus thought about the sounds he'd heard that first night, the door opening on its own. Do you believe in ghosts? He asked quietly. Kat was silent for a moment. I believe some places hold on to trauma. That violence and grief can soak into wood and steel like blood into fabric. Whether that's ghosts or just emotional residue. I don't know, but I know this car has a story that wanted to be told, and you're the one who's telling it. As November deepened and the first snow fell, Marcus began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something, creating something, honoring something. Every nail he hammered, every board he placed, was a small act of redemption, not just for the forgotten railroad men, but for himself. But progress brought unwanted attention. On a gray morning in late November, Marcus was outside the train car, splitting firewood Cat had brought for the small wood stove they'd installed, when a black SUV pulled into the rail yard. It was a new vehicle, expensive, completely out of place among the rust and industrial decay. The SUV parked near the train car, and a man climbed out. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored wool coat over a business suit, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. His hair was perfectly styled, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. Sargent immediately moved between Marcus and the stranger, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Easy, Sergeant, Marcus said softly. Let's see what he wants. The man approached with his hands visible, showing he meant no threat. Good morning. You must be Marcus Webb. I'm Councilman Richard Holbrook. I represent District 3 of Torrington County, which includes this rail yard. Marcus leaned the axe against a stump and crossed his arms. What can I do for you, Councilman? Holbrook's smile widened. Actually, it's more about what I can do for you. I heard about your situation here. Buying this old train car, trying to make it livable. That's quite an undertaking for one man. I'm managing, Marcus said flatly. I'm sure you are. And I have to say, I admire your determination. But the thing is, Marcus, this rail yard is being redeveloped. The county purchased the land from the railroad last month, and we're planning to turn it into a commercial industrial park. Warehouses, logistics centers, that sort of thing. It's going to bring jobs and revenue to a community that desperately needs both. Marcus felt his stomach drop. And my train car? Well, that's the issue. You technically own the car, but you don't own the land it's sitting on. And unfortunately, your vehicle isn't compatible with our development plans. So you want me to move it? Exactly, Holbrook said, as if Marcus had just solved a difficult puzzle. Now, I understand you don't have the resources to relocate a 40-foot train car, so I'm here to make you an offer. The county will purchase the car from you for $5,000. That's 5,000 times what you paid for it. Plus, we'll help you find housing in town, connect you with veteran services, really set you up for success. Marcus stared at him. $5,000 was more money than he'd seen in months. With that kind of cash, he could rent an apartment, get back on his feet, maybe even start the process of regaining visitation rights with Emma. But something about Holbrook's too smooth manner, his too wide smile, made Marcus's instincts scream warning. Let me think about it, Marcus said carefully. Holbrook's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But I should mention, we're on a tight development timeline. I'll need your answer by the end of the week. And Marcus? His voice took on a harder edge. If you decide not to sell, the county does have the authority to condemn the car as a public hazard and have it removed. But I'd hate for it to come to that. Much cleaner if we can work together, don't you think? With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, Holbrook climbed back into his SUV and drove away. Marcus stood in the cold, watching the vehicle disappear, his mind racing. What do you think, Sergeant? He asked the dog. Something about that guy feel wrong to you? Sergeant huffed in agreement. That evening, when Kat arrived with supplies, Marcus told her about Holbrook's visit. Her reaction was immediate and visceral. That son of a bitch. You know him? Everyone in this county knows Richard Holbrook. He's been on the town council for 15 years, and in that time he's gotten very rich by steering development contracts to companies he has consulting relationships with. She made air quotes with her fingers, which is just a legal way of taking bribes. So the industrial park is real? Oh, it's real. But here's the thing. The county doesn't own this rail yard. The railroad still owns it. I made sure of that before I helped you set up here. Holbrook's lying to you. Marcus felt anger kindle in his chest. Why? Why come here and lie about owning the land? Kat thought for a moment. I don't know, but I'll bet anything it has something to do with what's in that cargo hold. The memorial, the history, the evidence of government negligence in handling nuclear materials. That's the kind of story that could make national news if it got out. And national news means attention, investigations, maybe lawsuits against the government for covering up radiation exposure. You think Holbrook knows about the cargo hold? I think somebody knows, and they're paying Holbrook to make the problem disappear. $5,000 is nothing if they're trying to bury a scandal that could cost millions in settlements and destroy reputations. Marcus looked at the train car, now glowing with warm light from the windows, smoke rising from the chimney of the wood stove. It had become his home, his mission, his purpose. I'm not selling, he said quietly. Kat smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. But Marcus, you need to understand. If you refuse Holbrook, he's going to come at you hard. He'll use every legal trick he has to force you out. Maybe even some illegal ones. Let him try, Marcus said, his jaw set. I've faced worse than a corrupt politician. Kat squeezed his shoulder. That's the spirit. But we need to be smart about this. We need to document everything. The memorial, the journal entries, the government cover-up. We need to make copies and get them to people who can't be silenced. Journalists, historians, lawyers. We turn this into a story that's too big to bury. How do we do that? Kat grinned. Leave that to me. I know some people. Over the next few days, Kat worked her network of contacts. She connected with an investigative journalist from the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle who specialized in government accountability stories. She reached out to a lawyer who handled veterans' rights cases pro bono. She even contacted the National Archives to request all declassified documents related to nuclear materials transport in 1952. Meanwhile, Marcus continued improving the train car, but now with a new urgency. He documented everything with his phone camera, the memorial wall, the journal entries, the evidence of the cover-up. He made multiple copies of the photos and stored them in different locations, including emailing them to Kat's secure cloud storage. Sergeant seemed to sense the increased tension. The dog became more protective, more alert, spending hours watching the rail yard for any sign of unwanted visitors. On Wednesday evening, 3 days after Holbrook's visit, Marcus was inside the train car organizing his notes when Sergeant suddenly lunged to his feet, barking aggressively at the door. Marcus grabbed his flashlight and stepped outside. The rail yard was dark, lit only by distant security lights. But Marcus could see movement near the fence line. 3 figures, dressed in dark clothing, moving toward the train car. "This is private property," Marcus called out. "You're trespassing." One of the figures raised his hand, and Marcus saw the glint of a camera lens. They were taking photos. "Railroad company hired us to document the condition of the car," one of them shouted back. "We got permission." Marcus knew immediately it was a lie. Kat had confirmed the railroad wasn't involved with any of this. These were Holbrook's people, sent to gather evidence they could use to condemn the car as unsafe. "Sergeant Guard," Marcus commanded. The Malinois shot forward, not attacking but positioning himself between Marcus and the intruders. The dog's aggressive barking and bared teeth were enough. The three figures retreated quickly, scrambling back over the fence and disappearing into the night. Marcus's phone rang. It was Kat. "Marcus, I just got a call from a friend at the county office. Holbrook filed an emergency motion to have your train car declared a public safety hazard. There's a hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning. If he wins, they'll send a crew to haul your car away by the end of the week." Marcus felt the walls closing in. He looked at the train car, his home, his purpose, the memorial to 3 forgotten men. "What do I do?" he asked. "You fight," Kat said firmly. "You come to that hearing, you bring the evidence, and you fight. I'll be right beside you." That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat at the small table he'd built, surrounded by journal entries and photographs and documents, preparing his case. Sargent lay at his feet, warm and solid and loyal. As dawn broke over the rail yard, Marcus looked at the sealed cargo hold door. In the early light, the painted message was barely visible. "They promised we'd be safe. They lied. I won't let them bury you again," Marcus said to the ghosts of Jack, Tom, and Henry. "I promise." The county administrative building was a low-slung brick structure that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Marcus stood in the hallway outside the hearing room, wearing the only clean clothes he owned, his old army dress uniform. He'd kept it stored in a vacuum-sealed bag, never quite able to throw it away. The uniform still fit, though it hung a bit looser now than it had 5 years ago. Kat stood beside him, dressed in clean coveralls and carrying a thick folder of documents. "You look good," she said. "Professional." "I look like a homeless veteran playing dress-up," Marcus replied, tugging at the collar. "You look like a man who served his country and deserves respect," Kat corrected firmly. "Remember that when you're in there." The door to the hearing room opened, and a clerk called them in. The room was small and windowless, dominated by a large table where 3 county commissioners sat. 20 minutes later, Kat arrived with her camera, and shortly after that, a county sheriff's deputy. The deputy took photos, collected samples of the accelerant, and took Marcus's statement. "You know who did this?" the deputy asked. "I know who ordered it," Marcus said, "but I can't prove it." The deputy looked uncomfortable. "Mr. Webb, if you're implying Councilman Holbrook." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact." The deputy closed his notebook. "Without evidence, I can't do anything. I'll file the report, but—" He trailed off, his meaning clear. After he left, Kat and Marcus surveyed the damage. "This is bad," Kat said. "The county inspector is supposed to come in 10 days. If he sees this damage, there's no way he'll certify the structure as safe." Marcus stared at the charred wall. 2 weeks of work, destroyed in minutes. "I can't rebuild this in 10 days, he said quietly. "Not with volunteer labor and salvage materials. It's over." Holbrook won. Kat grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at her. "Listen to me. You don't give up. That's not who you are. We'll figure this out." "How?" "Even if I had money, which I don't, I can't get the materials and labor in time. And even if I did, what's to stop him from burning it down again?" "We make sure the world is watching," Kat said firmly. "We go public with the whole story. The memorial, the cover-up, the harassment from Holbrook. We make it so big that he can't make another move without everyone knowing he's behind it." "And how do we do that?" Kat pulled out her phone. "Remember that journalist I contacted? She's been digging into the 1952 accident, and she's very interested in corporate and government corruption. I think it's time we gave her an exclusive." 2 days later, Marcus sat in the train car, now covered in fire damage but still standing, across from journalist Claire Morrison. She was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and skeptical, with a digital recorder running on the table between them. "Walk me through it from the beginning," she said. "How did a homeless veteran end up as the guardian of a 70-year-old government cover-up?" Marcus told her everything. The auction, the sealed cargo hold, the journal, the memorial. Holbrook's pressure tactics. The arson. Claire listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Marcus finished, she sat back. This is an incredible story, she said. Government negligence, corporate corruption, a veteran fighting to honor forgotten working-class heroes. It has everything. But I need to verify the facts. Can I see the memorial? Marcus led her to the cargo hold. When Claire saw the wall of photographs and Jack Reeves' journal, she began taking pictures rapidly. This is powerful, she murmured. Really powerful. Mr. Webb, if I write this story, it's going to get attention. National attention. Are you prepared for that? I don't care about attention, Marcus said. I care about the truth. Those men deserve the truth. Claire smiled. Then let's give it to them. The article ran 4 days later on the front page of the Wyoming Tribune-Eagle Sunday edition. Forgotten Railroad Heroes. Government cover-up preserved in abandoned train car. The story detailed everything. The 1952 accident, the 3 dead workers, the memorial Marcus had discovered, and Holbrook's attempts to destroy the evidence. It included photos of the memorial, excerpts from Jack Reeves' journal, and quotes from nuclear safety experts saying the government's handling of radioactive materials in the 1950s was criminally negligent. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By Tuesday, it was on national news sites. By Wednesday, Marcus's train car was surrounded by news crews. Marcus gave interview after interview, standing in front of the fire-damaged car with Sargent at his side, telling the story of Jack, Tom, and Henry, 3 ordinary men who died because their government valued secrecy over safety. The public response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, enough to pay for professional repairs to bring the train car up to code. Volunteers appeared from across the state, offering labor and materials. A local contractor even donated a flatbed trailer and crane time to move the car to a permanent location when Marcus was ready. But the most powerful moment came when Marcus received a letter from Tom Bradley's granddaughter, Kat's niece, who Marcus hadn't even known existed. The letter was handwritten, the paper stained with tears. Dear Mr. Webb, I never knew my grandfather. He died decades before I was born. My grandmother rarely talked about him. The pain was too raw. But because of you, I know his name. I know his story. I know he was brave and loyal, and that he died for no good reason except corporate greed and government indifference. Thank you for not letting him be forgotten. Thank you for caring when no one else did. Marcus sat in the train car, holding that letter, and wept. For the first time since Afghanistan, his tears weren't from pain or loss. They were from something else. Something like purpose. The public attention did more than raise money for repairs. It also drew scrutiny to Councilman Richard Holbrook. The journalist, Claire Morrison, had continued digging into Holbrook's background. She discovered a pattern. Whenever development projects moved forward in the county, Holbrook's consulting firm received substantial payments from the winning contractors. She found evidence of undisclosed conflicts of interest, violations of ethics rules, and possible criminal bribery. 2 weeks after her first article, Claire published a follow-up. County councilman's corrupt dealings exposed. The fallout was swift. Holbrook was suspended from the county commission pending an investigation. Federal prosecutors opened a case. His political career was over. But the man himself wasn't going quietly. Marcus was working on repairs to the train car, now surrounded by supporters and volunteers, when a familiar black SUV pulled into the rail yard. Holbrook climbed out, and Marcus immediately saw that something was wrong. The man looked unraveled. His expensive coat was rumpled, his hair uncombed, his eyes wild. You, Holbrook snarled, pointing at Marcus. You destroyed me. You ruined my life. Marcus set down his tools and faced him calmly. Sargent moved into guard position, sensing danger. You destroyed yourself, Marcus said evenly. I just told the truth. The truth. Holbrook laughed bitterly. You don't know anything about the truth. You're a broken soldier playing hero with a rusty train car. You should have taken my money and disappeared. Who hired you? Marcus asked. Who wanted the memorial destroyed? Holbrook's face twisted with rage and fear. People you don't want to cross. People with real power. They told me to handle this quietly, and I failed. You have no idea what you've done, the forces you've. He reached into his coat pocket. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Sargent saw the gesture as a threat and lunged forward, barking aggressively. Marcus moved on instinct, stepping between the dog and Holbrook. Holbrook pulled his hand from his pocket, holding not a weapon, but an envelope. He threw it at Marcus's feet. There. That's what they were so afraid of. That's why they hired me to make you disappear. I'm done being their errand boy. Let the whole world know. With that, Holbrook stumbled back to his SUV and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in the dust, staring at the envelope. Kat, who had been inside the train car, emerged. What was that about? Marcus picked up the envelope. Inside were several documents, government memos from the 1950s, recently declassified. He read them, his expression darkening. Oh my God, he whispered. What? The 1952 accident wasn't an accident. The government knew the cargo was unstable. They knew there was a risk of derailment. But they sent the train anyway because they were racing against the Soviets to build nuclear weapons. Jack, Tom, and Henry, they were sacrificed, murdered for political expediency. Kat read over his shoulder, her face going pale. This proves negligent homicide at minimum. If this gets out, it's getting out, Marcus said firmly. This is what those men died protecting. Jack kept a journal so the truth wouldn't die with them. And I'll be damned if I let it stay buried any longer. He called Claire Morrison. The next article was even more explosive. Declassified documents prove railroad deaths were preventable. Government chose weapons race over worker safety. The response was seismic. Congressional hearings were announced. Families of other workers exposed to radiation during the nuclear weapons program began coming forward. A class action lawsuit was filed against the federal government. And 3 forgotten railroad workers, Jack Reeves, Tom Bradley, and Henry Chun, finally got their names in history books, not as anonymous victims, but as martyrs who exposed a government willing to sacrifice its citizens for national security. Winter came to Wyoming with full force, but Marcus was ready. The train car was now completely weatherproofed, heated, and legally certified as a dwelling. The fire damage had been repaired, and the structure was stronger than ever. More importantly, Marcus had a plan for its future. Catherine Talbot had donated a half-acre plot of land on the outskirts of Torrington, a beautiful spot with views of the mountains, close enough to town for services, but private enough for peace. In a ceremony attended by dozens of supporters, Marcus's train car was lifted by crane and transported to its permanent home. The move was documented by news crews, and the images of the Great Green Express car rolling down the highway became iconic. A symbol of redemption, of forgotten heroes remembered, of a system forced to reckon with its past. Once the train car was settled on its new foundation, Marcus and a team of volunteers completed the final touches. They built a wooden deck around the entrance. They installed solar panels on the roof for supplemental power. They landscaped the area with native plants. But the most important addition was the memorial. In front of the train car, Marcus erected a granite monument engraved with the names and photographs of Jack Reeves, Tom Bradley, and Henry Chun. The inscription read, "In memory of 3 railroad workers who died December 12, 1952, while transporting nuclear materials for their government. They were promised safety. They deserve truth. They will not be forgotten." The dedication ceremony was held on December 12, 2020, exactly 68 years after the accident. Over 100 people attended, including Tom Bradley's surviving family members, descendants of Jack Reeves and Henry Chun who had traveled from across the country, veterans groups, reporters, and townspeople who had supported Marcus's fight. Marcus stood before the memorial in his dress uniform, Sergeant sitting proudly at his side. "I didn't know these men," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the cold December air. "I never met them, but I know their story because one of them, Jack Reeves, had the courage to write it down. He knew he was dying, and he used his last hours to make sure the truth survived." He looked at the faces of the families gathered. Your loved ones were heroes. Not the kind celebrated with medals and parades, but the everyday heroes who show up for work, who provide for their families, who trust that when their government tells them something is safe, it's actually true. They deserved better. They deserved to be protected. And when they weren't, they deserved to be remembered. He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "I bought this train car for $1 because I needed shelter. But I stayed because these men needed a witness. They needed someone to care. And I'm honored, truly honored, to be that person." Kat stepped forward and placed flowers at the base of the memorial. Then, one by one, the families did the same, until the monument was surrounded by flowers. As the ceremony ended and people began to depart, a woman approached Marcus. She was in her late 20s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Mr. Webb? I'm Elena Chun. Henry Chun was my great-grandfather." Marcus shook her hand. "I'm glad you could come. I wanted to thank you," Elena said. "My family always knew something was wrong with the official story about how he died. But we had no proof, no details. Because of you, we finally have answers. We can grieve properly. We can honor him properly." She handed Marcus a small wooden box. "This was found in my great-grandfather's belongings after he died. We never knew what it meant, but now, I think you should have it." Marcus opened the box. Inside was a railroad watch, a beautiful piece of equipment, the kind conductors used to keep precise time. It was engraved, "To Henry Chun, for 10 years of faithful service, Great Northern Railway, 1942. "I can't accept this," Marcus said. "It's a family heirloom. And you're part of the family now," Elena said firmly. "You're the keeper of their memory. Please, it would mean a lot to us." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. He carefully closed the box. "I'll treasure it. I promise." As night fell and the last visitors departed, Marcus stood alone at the memorial with Sargent. The temperature was dropping toward zero, but inside the train car, warm light glowed through the windows. His phone buzzed. A text from Kat. "Proud of you. You did good." Another text, this one from an unknown number. Marcus opened it and felt his heart stop. It was a photo of a young girl, about 9 years old, sitting in a sunny kitchen. She was smiling at the camera, holding up a piece of paper. The paper had a drawing on it, a train car, a man, and a dog. Below the photo was a message. "Emma drew this after seeing you on the news. She's proud of you, Marcus. Maybe it's time to talk." "Sarah." Marcus's hand trembled. He looked down at Sargent, then up at the memorial, then at the train car behind him. He had spent a year falling, and then he had spent 6 months climbing back up, one rusted nail at a time. "We did it, buddy," he whispered to the dog. "We made it home." The June sun was warm on the Wyoming grassland. Marcus stood on the deck of the train car, watching Emma play fetch with Sargent in the yard. She was laughing, the kind of pure, unself-conscious laughter that only children could manage, as the Malinois retrieved the ball again and again with tireless enthusiasm. Sarah sat in a lawn chair, watching them with a smile. She and Marcus weren't back together. That bridge had burned too completely, but they were talking. Co-parenting. Emma spent every other weekend here now, sleeping in the converted cargo hold that Marcus had turned into a guest bedroom. The memorial wall had been moved to the main living area, where visitors could see it. The cargo hold was now a museum of sorts, open by appointment for school groups, historians, and families researching their own lost relatives from the nuclear weapons program. Marcus had become, improbably, a public speaker. He traveled to schools and veterans groups, telling the story of the 3 railroad men and of his own journey from homeless to purpose-driven. The railroad watch Henry Chun had carried was always in his pocket, a reminder of the thin line between forgotten and remembered. The train car itself had become something of a landmark. Tour companies included it in their historical route. Journalists still stopped by occasionally, and veterans passing through Wyoming often made the pilgrimage, needing to see proof that broken people could be made whole again. But the best part, the part that made everything worth it, was moments like this. Emma running in the grass, Sargent's tail wagging, Sarah's genuine smile. Marcus's phone rang. It was Kat. "Hey," she said. "Just wanted to give you a heads up. The Congressional Committee investigating the radiation exposure cases just released their final report. They're recommending a formal apology and compensation fund for all families affected by negligent nuclear materials handling between 1945 and 1970. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Jack, Tom, and Henry got their justice. They did. And Marcus? There's something else. The Railroad Historical Society wants to add your train car to the National Register of Historic Places. They're calling it a significant site in both labor history and government accountability." Marcus looked at the train car, at the monument in front of it, at his daughter playing in the yard. "Tell them yes," he said. "This place should be remembered." After he hung up, Marcus walked down from the deck and sat in the grass. Sargent immediately abandoned the ball game and trotted over, flopping down beside him. Emma followed, sitting cross-legged on Marcus's other side. "Dad?" she said, using the title that still made his heart swell. Tell me again about how you found the secret room." Marcus smiled and began the story, the one he'd told dozens of times now, but never tired of telling. The story of three men who died for no good reason. The story of a veteran who bought a train car for $1. The story of a loyal dog who never gave up on his human. And the story of how sometimes the things we think are worthless turn out to be priceless. As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus Webb looked at his home. The train car that had saved his life by giving him something to save, and felt, for the first time in years, complete. Sargent's head rested on his lap. Emma leaned against his shoulder. And in the windows of the train car, warm light glowed, welcoming them back to the place where forgotten men had finally been remembered and broken soldiers had finally found peace. The train car that nobody wanted had become the home that everyone needed. Friends, sometimes the most valuable things in life come to us for almost nothing. Not because they're worthless, but because the world hasn't yet recognized their true value. Marcus bought a train car for $1, but what he really purchased was purpose, redemption, and the chance to honor three men who'd been forgotten by history. And isn't that what we're all searching for? Not wealth or fame, but meaning. The chance to matter. The opportunity to make sure that lives, including our own, aren't lived in vain. The next time you see something broken, something everyone else has dismissed as worthless, look closer. It might be exactly what you need. And more importantly, it might need you. Thank you for walking this journey with Marcus, Sargent, and the memory of Jack, Tom, and Henry. If their story moved you, please consider sharing it. And if you'd like to join our community for more tales of loyalty, redemption, and second chances, we'd be honored to have you subscribe. Until next time, may you find value in unexpected places, and may you never forget that every life, no matter how ordinary it seems, deserves to be remembered.